існували на той час, розуміючи, що інформаційний простір України буде піддаватися атакам, президент України, поважний пан Володимир Зеленський, зробив висновок про необхідність створення такого центру. З того часу вся наша діяльність, вона направлена на захист інформаційної безпеки громадян України та пошуку інформаційних загроз. Сьогодні стратегічні комунікації є частиною інформаційного захисту, а саме найактуальніший захист для України сьогодні – це захист від російської дезінформації. В нас є конкретний ворог, від якого ми очікуємо конкретних загроз і бачимо, чим закінчуються інформаційні атаки на Україну. Вони закінчуються прикладами такі, як Буча, Гостомель, Харків і інші міста України, які сьогодні стали вже іменами нарицательними. Ми впевнені, що саме розповсюдження наративів є одним з основних інструментів впливу на інформаційний простір. І тому Центр протидії дезінформації з особливою увагою досліджує саме механізми шкідливого втручання. Ми відслідковуємо, яким чином їх використовує Росія для просування власних інтересів на міжнародній арені. У більшості випадків російські наративи спрямовані сьогодні на знищення України як держави, розхитування військово-політичної ситуації та нагнітання паніки. Втім, російська дезінформація цілеспрямовано діє і на підрив відносин України із шановними партнерами. Так вчора, збираючись на саміт, посольство України в Туреччині повідомило нам про знайдений новий наратив, який розповідають російські пропагандисти. Україна начебто підтримує терористичні організації та відкрито виступає за підрив територіальної цілісності Туреччини на користь терористів. Це відверта, абсолютна брехня, яку Росія, нічим не гребуючи, розповсюджує по всьому світу і в першу чергу Туреччині, намагаючись посварити наші народи. Ми різко засуджуємо такі намагання і вже висловили відповідну ноту протесту. Серед інших наративів, які просуває Росія, минулого тижня ми зафіксували наступне. Я зараз розповім про конкретне. Перший приклад. Нібито українська влада перешкоджає виїзду населення з міста Запоріжжя, щоб таким чином прикрити військових щитом з мирних людей. Таким наративом Росія намагається висвітлити Україну як державу-терорист, яка не дотримується правил ведення війни. Ну, як можна в це повірити? Але, тим не менше, ті, хто мало розуміють про те, що відбувається в Україні, можуть повірити і такій відвертій несенітниці. Другий приклад. Нібито мешканці концтабору України працюють на виправних роботах. Тобто, послухайте, концтабір в Україні, мешканці працюють. Насправді, таким чином інформаційні групи описали ініціативу з працевлаштування людей для відбудови власної країни. Звичайно, що цей наратив направлений на псування іміджу України та нагнітання паніки. Ще один приклад. Енергетики України через зруйновану інфраструктуру змушені відключати південні регіони України від електрики, щоб на Заході так звані бандерівці і фашисти могли насолоджуватися світлом. Ну, звичайно, що в такий спосіб росіяни намагаються посварити українців між собою, посіяти максимальний розбрат. Крім цього, відразу після укладання зернових угод, в тому числі завдяки участі Туреччини, Росія запустила дезінформаційну кампанію зі зриву зазначених угод і дискредитацію України. І яскравим прикладом виступає наступна кампанія. 22 серпня, фактично через місяць після відправлення першого вантажу зерна, російські дезінформаційні мережі, а це саме мережі, почали розповсюджувати інформацію про те, що СБУ готує підрив іноземного вантажного корабля, таким чином зриваючи безпеку, яка утворилася завдяки цим коридорам. І це лише одиниці з численного набору наративів, які розповсюджує Росія. Оскільки, якщо казати про цифри, то щодня Центр протидії дезінформації відслідковує близько 100 нових інформаційних атак на Україну. Для фіксування та своєчасного реагування на постійно виникаючі інформаційні загрози ми вимушені були шукати інноваційні підходи до цього питання. І тому Центр започаткував власну систему виявлення та оцінки інформаційних загроз. Для об'єктивної оцінки та вибору відповідного реагування використовується спеціально розроблене і в подальшому модифіковане програмне забезпечення, штучний інтелект та матриця оцінки інформаційної загрози. Чому я кажу про мережі, саме про мережі? Бо насправді ми сьогодні говоримо не про дезінформацію, ні про пропаганду, ні про маніпуляції, ні про фейки. Це мережі скоординованої неавтентичної поведінки. Завдяки сучасним технологіям ми можемо відслідкувати і довести штучність цих дезінформаційних атак. І ось після цього нам необхідно погодити загальну термінологію і загальний підход в законодавчому рівні. Тобто, якщо ми бачимо, що в дезінформаційних атаках присутня синтетичність, штучність, дезінформатори мають розуміти, що за все це їм доведеться відповідати. Вони, як казав поважний пан президент Ердоган, є цифровими інформаційними терористами. І не треба сьогодні боятися цього слова, бо вони сіять тероризм, розбрат і паніку по всьому світу. Проте я хочу сказати, що не з усіма інформаційними викликами Україна може впоратись сама. Тому велику роль у протидії дезінформації грає саме підтримка міжнародної спільноти. І мені дуже приємно, що сьогодні світ розуміє, перед якою загрозою ми стоїмо. Ті наробки, які є в нашому центрі, отримані фактично в умовах бойових дій, ними ми готові ділитися з партнерами і обмінюватися досвідом задля побудови міцного щиту проти дезінформації. Користуючись нагодою, прагну закликати шановних гостей серйозно поставитись до цієї проблеми, а саме до загрози інформаційного тероризму. Світ все ще називає журналістами РІА Новості та Супутник, блогерами Володимира Соловйова, а ведучою Скабєєву. Кожен з них б'є словом, і ці слова мають прямі наслідки. Бо спершу війна, вона починається в головах людей і вже потім на полі бою. Ці особи, про яких я сказав, вони інформаційні терористи. І відповідальність за їхні вчинки рівносильна відповідальності за тероризм згідно з міжнародними конвенціями. Ми рішуче засуджуємо інформаційний тероризм і намагання втручання в національну інформаційну безпеку держав з боку іноземних держав. І тому спонукаємо наших партнерів відкликати ліцензії дезінформаційних мереж, таких Російської Федерації, таких як Супутник та РТ, на жодній мові, бо це все чиста пропаганда і дезінформація. Ми, в свою чергу, можемо боротися із дезінформацією, але без вашої підтримки світу не вдасться зупинити дезінформаційну машину Росії. Ми щиро запрошуємо до співпраці партнерів заради захисту наших громадян. Тільки об'єднавшись спільно з такими зусиллями, ми зможемо створити стійку систему інформаційної безпеки, яка оберігатиме людей та їхню свідомість. Ще раз завдячую всім присутнім та хочу побажати плідних результатів цьому саміту і вірю, що сьогодні тут зібрались найкращі з професіоналів у своїй справі. Дякую. Слава Україні!
Thank you, Andrei. I seriously interested the role of international community fighting against the disinformation in a such hot war field or the conflict zone. We will talk about more detail in the second round. Thank you. Our third speaker will be Caitlin Chin. Caitlin, I know you have some works on the disinformation and some companies in generally. So floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it's great to be here at the Stratcom Summit in Istanbul with participants from approximately 40 countries. I think that really highlights how disinformation isn't just a local problem or a domestic problem. It truly is a global issue. And the first panel highlighted how technology amplifies false information online. And lies or misinformation, this isn't a new problem, but technology has enabled its spread on a much faster and larger scale than we've seen in the past. And society, too, has shifted in recent years. 50 years ago, if somebody wanted to access information about politics or about national security, they might have gone to their local newspaper. But now in 2022, people have many more options. We see that more and more people are getting their news online from social media, from user forums, and I think that it creates this environment of information overload, just like you were talking about, where false information can proliferate online, and sometimes it's very difficult to know the difference. And we've seen many examples of this. In recent years, we've seen false narratives spread related to national security or foreign aggression, related to climate change, to pandemics, to election integrity. So it's not at all surprising that we're seeing many governments around the world saying that disinformation is a problem that we need to address. I think we have hit that inflection point. The problem is, though, is that disinformation is a very nuanced and complex problem. And I think it's much easier to identify the harms than it is to identify the solutions. For example, we know that disinformation can be harmful. On an individual level, disinformation can result in reputational harms or psychological harms. It can actually create financial loss or even physical injuries to people. And on a macro level, we've seen disinformation create loss of trust in institutions. It's made it really hard for governments to respond to global crises, such as pandemics or climate change. That said, even though we know that disinformation can be harmful, the solution is not always clear. For one matter, there are technical questions. For example, disinformation is often centralized. There are often many different sources of disinformation, and it can spread on many different platforms. For example, should there be different standards if disinformation is posted online, publicly, on social media, for example, than if disinformation is sent on an encrypted messaging service where somebody might have a greater expectation of privacy? Or should there be different standards for a smaller internet platform to regulate disinformation compared to a larger platform that might have more resources and more capability to employ either human or automated reviewers? These are all questions that internet platforms are asking, and there are also ethical or moral questions as well. For example, we know that disinformation can be harmful, but it's not always illegal in many countries. And accuracy can also be subjective. So this leads to questions such as who gets to decide what information is false or what is considered disinformation compared to opinion or satire or somebody's viewpoint. And I do think that there are a lot of trade-offs when it comes to regulating disinformation as well. My last point will be that on a final note, I believe that the internet doesn't have borders. So if false or harmful information is posted online in one country, that information is visible in other countries. And on the flip side, if a piece of information is posted online and then taken down in one jurisdiction, that will also impact access to information around the world as well. And that is why I think that it's really important that we're having dialogues like this. I think that disinformation isn't a unilateral problem. It is truly a global phenomenon, and I think it's really beneficial to think about where countries could potentially align their approaches to regulating disinformation. All around the world, we're seeing governments express interest in passing new laws or considering new bills around content moderation, around fake news. But I think it could be really valuable to see where where there could potentially be shared values or opportunities for collaboration to counter disinformation as well. So I'm really glad that we're having this dialogue here at the Stratcom Summit, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Kathleen. As you said, the mobilization of the false narrators, I think will have a different implication or the consequences in different levels. Our last speaker is Radu Magdin. Mr. Magdin, you have both academic background and you have a huge experience in the practice in the field. So as a political strategist, how you will see how we can make the truth more louder in the politics?
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to such an interesting event. I particularly admire the global element because in a lot of cases on different continents we are very much aware of the regional component, but it's pretty much us in between us in pretty similar environments. So I love this diversity right now. We talk about making the truth louder, and we talk in a wider, let's say, age of uncertainty. But I may add, before proposing to you a certain mental map based on ours, an element of complexity. And I think it's pretty pretentious, both in a professional and in a sense of a practical political, or in an academic perspective, to try to come at this very moment in time, while we're still coping with this complexity, with a winning formula by which we can solve issues such as propaganda, disinformation, fake news, or upgrading the tone of truth. Speaking of this, I always believe, coming from a background of political communication, that if you have to speak louder, you have a problem, right? Because the more I speak louder, the more the tonality of the others will be louder, and then it's going to be quite a fight soon. Or if I use this loud tone, then the moment when I really want to stress something, my tone is already so loud that I'll not be getting to my audience. The reason why I made this intro is that I would like to put several aspects on your radar based on an R structure. Let's start with repetition. And I think that kudos, professional kudos to our Ukrainian friends. I think in this information warfare, in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, we have seen an element of quantity, both from a rhetorical perspective and from the perspective of how communication works, namely repetition. It's how can you make the truth louder? Perhaps you should repeat the truth or your assessment of the facts or your messaging, right? What you're trying to get across. So although this is a quantitative element, it's important. Because, as well showed also in the previous presentation and visualization, if you're not repeating your message, you will not have enough traction to get that truth across. Second of all, separate from quantity, quality. We are humans. And with all due respect, and I think here that political communications have more of a luxury than institutional communicators. In politics, you aim for power, and once you're in government, you aim to keep it. Of course, you also, in a very generous way of putting it, you aim for good governance, right? But separate from that, the objective is not, once you're in power, 100% just to make sure that there is truth, because there may be inconvenient truth in terms of how you govern. So from this perspective, yes, you can try to use the truth as an excuse and defend it, but coming from a background of government, I can tell you that nobody is 100% right in government all the time, not to mention it quite the contrary. I simply say this due to this complexity, and even more this decade where we're faced with a cocktail of crisis, because the dilemma of us being able to present a model that works is that either we're shallow enough to make it so general that it kind of sounds commonsensical and we adopt it, but then again, it's shallow, right? And it doesn't really adjust, it doesn't really personalize to a specific market. So repetition. Reframing, because speaking of our element of humanity, the message has to be attractive. And again, it's easier for political communicators than from institutional communicators, because institutional communicators are drier. They have to be drier. Sometimes personality is being dismissed as bad. I know, because I started my career in the Foreign Office, and I had once a more daring press release, and somebody just told me to calm down, right? Because I was a diplomat, and I was supposed to watch what I'm saying. Of course, the media didn't necessarily copy-paste by, or was very inspired by the issuing press release, but I ticked, at least in, let's say, in my ministry, what I had to tick from a professional perspective. Now, relativity, and you mentioned, well, my truth, your truth, his truth. I think this is why it's really hard to make the truth louder, and this is the risk of making the truth louder, because combined with relativity, if we're going for absolute truth, and not in a sense of decent rulemaking, the risk is repression. It's a risk that we face across the world. Yes, rules, and we have to think about the rules. I agree that there can be smearing campaign, trolling, and all, but it comes with the risks of a job. And I really do believe that, speaking of that very inspiring previous presentation, we should also pick our fights. We should really pick our fights as institutional communicators. Is it really worth it? I mean, even let's say if there's a smearing campaign, is it really worth my attention as the president level, prime ministerial level, even opposition level and so on? Is it really worth it? Perhaps it's, because if I keep doing this on a daily basis or weekly basis, I achieve nothing. I'm going into the next R, namely reaction. And I think that all strategic communications is primarily proactive. It doesn't mean that we periodically are not forced to be reactive, right? But if there's one thing which I think has been achieved, speaking of Stratcom, in the past few months, and this is where I finished my introductory talks, if there's one thing we kept complaining in different formats in the past 7 years, at least 8 years, it was Russian propaganda or Russian disinformation. Well, guess what? This year, vast majority of commentators, analysts, agreed that Ukrainian information warfare, or if you like to put it, reframe it, Ukrainian strategic communication, has been superior in action and results to the famous previous star of strategic communications, and this is my initial comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Radu. I actually like the notion of concept you use, the cocktail of crisis. I will ask about this later. In the second round, you will have a more extra 5 minutes. I would like to again start with Fatih Hüseyin. I got some notes related, depends on your speak. I actually asked the notion that you use the otherization and how these, the fake news and the post-truth age created otherization both in the national level and global level. Would you like to say something more related with this otherization issue?
Thank you. This whole issue of otherization actually is, it's something which is affecting many societies today, and I see this happening in my country, not just at a political level, but at a social level, even at a religious and cultural level. And this otherization where you have to validate yourself, your worth, your beliefs in opposition to others. This winner-takes-all mentality is now taking roots because in social media, through social media, the political discourse is focusing on drawing a stark contrast with the other people, the otherization. And what has made this very, very dangerous, in my opinion, is that this whole issue of strategic communication, Stratcom, it has been weaponized because of politics. 20 years ago, this wasn't the case. But now, if you are somebody who is indulging in politics, and as you very correctly said that the aim, this is not a moral crusade anymore. And a lot of people do politics to gain power, as you said, and then retain power. And in order to do that, in order to gain power, you have to have X number of people who are willing to give you that power. And it is so much more easier to convince them of your truth if you can validate their beliefs, if you can reinforce what they already think. And what that does is essentially that it makes it very tempting. I don't know, I'm sure I see a lot of very young people here also, but people who are closer to my age would probably remember the movie Matrix. And if you, in that Matrix, in the early scene, you know, he tells Neo, will you take the red pill or will you take the blue pill? And it's very tempting to take the blue pill if you know that if you take that pill and using that pill, you can fuel your narrative by reinforcing the biases of people in contrast to the others. And thanks to, or no thanks to social media, that message gets personalized because when I hear somebody speaking my truth, I don't want to hear the other person's truth because that makes it an inconvenient truth, as you said. So I can block it off by not going into the alternate reality and creating this own reality for myself that then reinforces the feeling of otherization. And that ends up producing the kind of politics which is divisive, which is poisonous, which is toxic, and which is being done at the expense of those who do not agree with you.
Thank you. I think the all speakers need sometimes a little bit apologize that you make it. Thank you, Fatih Hüseyin. I think the biggest, maybe the threat of this, the authorization that mentioned that it will become more weaponized day by day, unfortunately. My second question will be for Andriy. Andriy, you mentioned about the very important examples that right now you are facing in the Russian-Ukrainian war, but especially you mentioned the importance of the role of international community in fighting against the Russian disinformation in the warfare. I think it's very important dimension. Can you a little bit explain more how the Ukrainian office get helps from the international community while you are fighting against the Russian disinformation, both in the Ukrainian national level or also in a global level?
Дякую за запитання. Я зараз скажу дуже тихо і багато разів повторю. В «Матриці» був ще один герой. Він в кінці просив повернути йому червону таблетку, бо він казав, щастя – то коли ти нічого не знаєш. Росія таким чином приспала півсвіту. Півсвіту спало до війни в Україні і, в принципі, було щасливо. Вони були заможні, ситі і, в принципі, спокійні, приспані тим, що російський ведмідь, він надовго заснув в своїй берлозі. В першу чергу Росія приспала, звичайно, власний народ. І ті звірства, які ми бачимо в 21 віці, вони взагалі не притаманні цивілізації. Попри це, навіть кілька місяців після вторгнення світ продовжував вірити всій тій пропаганді, яку Росія розповсюджувала. Я сам народився в Луганську. Після початку війни я переїхав в Сєвєродонецьк, а згодом в Бучу. 24 лютого я знаходився в себе вдома в Бучі, коли почався вертольотний наліт. У мене є фото, в мене є відео. Я якраз снідав зі своєю родиною, коли полетіли вікна і почали палати будинки. Це наслідок фейків, всього-навсього. Газетка, телебачення. Якийсь журналіст просто взяв гроші, щоб заплатити кредит. Це історія про те, чим закінчується ваша правда і наша правда. Правда існує одна, і або ми приймаємо це, або ми з'їдаємо знову синю таблетку і живемо в своєму мареві. Нам знову цікаво, і хороше. Що стосується співпраці з партнерами, два основних напрямки на сьогоднішній день є пріоритетними. Перше – це аутентична цифрова експертиза, яка б визнавалась в більшості країн, я не кажу про всі, але в більшості, яка б чітко доводила штучність, синтетичність інформаційних атак. Сьогодні ворог для нас – це Росія. Вони зловживають елементарними цінностями, такими як там свобода слова або ще щось. Пропагандист виходить і розповідає за надане йому завдання зі словами «це думка редакції». Блогер або псевдоблогер, який це передруковує, він каже: перепрошую, це моя власна думка. Але методологія визначення цифрових слідів на сьогоднішній день має доводити штучність цих інформаційних кампаній. Всі ці псевдоблогери мають розуміти, за це все є відповідальність. Друге питання співпраці з міжнародними партнерами – це ще раз погодження законодавства, відповідальності саме за ці злочини. Ми в тісній співпраці, і те, що я сьогодні почув від уряду Туреччини, вас це питання також тривожить, і ви також працюєте над питанням законодавства. Так само це питання турбує майже весь світ, і в цьому напрямку ми максимально відкриті до подальшої співпраці з нашими партнерами, всіх тих, хто підтримує сьогодні Україну у визвольній, справедливій боротьбі проти фактично рашизму.
Thank you, Andrei. I think the Ukrainian and your office will be a later role model for other countries in upcoming years while we are talking about how a country conducted a fighting against the disinformation while the traditional conflicts ongoing on the fields. Thanks for the answer and your contribution. My third question for the Caitlin, of course. Caitlin, you directly underlined that mobilization of the false narrators and how it will affect our individual life. And I think it's very important to talk about how the individual level, the post-truth age, will influence us, because we are generally talking about the security level, global level, more macro level. Yes, we talk too much, but what about our lives?
Yeah, I mean, disinformation there are many different motivations behind disinformation, and many of them are harmful. Earlier in the panel, we covered some of the political motivations for disinformation, which generally have very broad effects on society. But disinformation can also be used to harm or target specific people or corporations. And I might add that disinformation isn't only words, it's not only information, but it can come in the forms of deepfake artificial intelligence videos, for example, or photos or audio that can be manipulated to make it look like somebody has said something or done something that they haven't actually done. And we have seen examples of either false information or false content used to target specific individuals, disproportionately public figures or journalists, and disproportionately women and people of color. And this can be done for many reasons: to silence somebody, to get revenge on somebody, or even to harass or to dox somebody. So when disinformation can be weaponized in ways that can disproportionately affect or target specific people. But there are other types of harms as well. Disinformation can also result in economic or financial losses. For example, if somebody uses disinformation to create a narrative that could potentially scam somebody or potentially manipulate their economic well-being. So yes, there are many, many harmful effects of disinformation, and I think that's one of the challenges. There isn't only one type or one source or one platform for disinformation. It's constantly evolving. Technology is advancing, bad actors are getting better, which makes it really, really hard sometimes to tell the difference between what is real and what is fake when fake news can sometimes appear to be very realistic.
Thank you, Caitlin. Last question to Radu. Radu, you mentioned the cocktail of crisis. I just want to ask it because I like the concept too much. I just want to ask that how does the reality of the cocktail of crisis directly affect the quality and the quantity that you mentioned when it comes to we are looking or searching for the truth in the post-truth world?
First of all, I think if I were to borrow a trigram of 3S this time, substance, style, and spin, I would say that on the substance, things are bad. So it's very hard when things are bad on the substance, when people and governments feel overwhelmed by so many crises. It's not about good willingness. Look at the trust in institutions. I tend to look periodically at the Gallup newsletters, which follow things worldwide. So even in countries where we used to have very high level of trust in government and institutions in terms of competence, now this level is going down. So even the most competent or perceived as competent governments around the world are having problems in their own constituencies with their own citizens. We are all overwhelmed. So this cocktail of crisis is creating this feeling of, it's perhaps too much on our plate. The instinct is, in such a constant political instinct, perhaps also institutional with political driving, is let's manage what burns first. So we take fires one by one. Yes, of course, speaking of previous talks and presentations, right, some of the things remain there, right? So inflation, right? COVID, okay, in the shadow, lurking, right? Energy issues, war. But on a weekly basis, speaking of truth, the truth is, on a weekly basis, you have a series of major topics which don't disappear, and you have to show that somehow you're managing them, or you have to really be careful how you craft ways, or, I'm sorry to say this as a strategic communications professional coming from politics, sometimes you have to manufacture new topics, or keep people busy with new songs for a while, right? Because you can't talk Monday inflation, Tuesday inflation, Wednesday inflation, Thursday inflation, and after 3 months you discover what? That you're incompetent on inflation. That may be the truth. And it's an inconvenient truth. I say this why? Because recently I had lunch with somebody from our national bank, and he was so happy about something which I think is a very geeky joy. He told me, have you noticed that inflation is starting to lose its steam? I said, what do you mean? I mean, it's still over there. He said, yeah, but it's dropping in terms of upward terms. So in terms of upward terms, it's dropping with 0 point something. And I go okay, it's a geeky, perhaps this could be part of a good news strategy in which somebody comes to the fore and tells the truth, namely that at least we're not speeding towards the cliff. We have managed to slow down and we're enjoying the view. It's not easy to communicate that. Of course, it's a good time to be in opposition. For institutions, I think, for institutional communicators, I think it's a very stressful time, because stress in politics transforms into institutional stress, right? Because in politics you get the mandate, but then again, whenever there's something faulty, you feel the need to, pass it forward. So I'm optimistic for the decade in the sense that I believe we're all stuck together at the global level. So it's not just a regional problem, which means that as soon as somebody comes with different recipes, as soon as we adjust and so on, we're going to be able to kind of copy-paste and adjust, which is different than from a regional crisis, right? Because at the regional crisis, there is not a huge amount of creativity being involved. So we are all in gray land. I'm optimistic it's going to be not a white land. I'm optimistic it's going to be light gray land by 2025. In the meantime, brace yourselves for the inconvenient truth that each week it's a crisis.
Thank you. At least Radu has some optimism. Thanks for the, first of all, I would like to thank the Director of Communication having such an amazing panel. And then, of course, we have a very distinguished speakers. Thanks for all of them for using time very efficiently and wisely. I was so happy to be part of this panel. Thanks for everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, you're extremely wise in terms of your time usage. I'm just wondering if anybody from our audience has any questions for our panelists. We do have time for a couple more. What my plan is to do is to actually skip the coffee break. If you're dying for some hot beverage, please excuse yourself. But I really don't want to lose this traction that we've got right now. It's very difficult to get people back in the audience. So if we have 5 minutes, if you have any questions, please stand up. I believe we have microphones in the house. And please direct your questions to either our panelist or our moderator. Any questions in the house? Yes, stand up and introduce yourself. There you go.
Hello, my name is Abdul Karim. I'm from Guinea. What I want to ask is that, as a political sciences student, I have a confusion in having a truth information. Because mostly, when we do some researches, we find out there is mainstream media's information. But some of them, how can I say that? They are confusing for me because many of them, they have always the same narrations, and mostly the mainstream medias are being heard than others. Like in that way, we can just give maybe an example of maybe, let's say, BBC or CNN. I want to give the example of maybe the war in Iraq in 2003. Most of them, they said Saddam Hussein, he has chemical weapons and these kind of things. And maybe 2 months ago, I was watching a video which Nancy Pelosi herself said that at that time, the decision of George Bush was a wrong decision because Saddam Hussein did not have a chemical weapons. With that way, how can we reach good information, and how can we differ between right and wrong information? Thank you, that's my question.
Would you like to answer with the
Sure,
question?
quickly. Thank you very much. I think the George Bush Iraq war example that you gave, I think that's very relevant because even though there was no social media at that time, that particular moment and decision is considered as one of the key post-truth disinformation decisions of that time, which actually led to an entire war based on something which was false. And I'll give you a personal example. At that particular time, I was working for an American television channel. I won't give the name right now. And I was based in New York in the newsroom. And when this decision, if you remember, the Secretary of State at the UN, he showed this thing saying, here's the proof that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. And in that newsroom, sir, there's an American newsroom, when some people, including myself, said in a discussion, well, we are the media, what questions are we going to ask? And there was so much pressure on the media that there was zero discussion. There was zero questioning by that media, which is trained to ask those questions. Why, what Colin Powell was saying was correct or not, because the feeling was that if we ask this question now, we are going to be branded as unpatriotic. And that led to that entire war. Now, if you fast forward 20 years, because of the social media, it's easier for other people to ask that question. But here's the problem. The fact that today's conventional media is not asking those questions is because now that conventional media 20 years ago that CNN or BBC were not competing with Facebook and Twitter. Today they are. Not only are they competing with Facebook and Twitter, they're also competing with every person who has a smartphone. So therefore, in order to retain their audiences, they have to loosen their editorial filters. And once those filters begin to loosen, this kind of fake untruths begin to come through the legitimate so-called mainstream media, which then produces the confusion that you're talking about.
Thank you. Of course, Radu.
Are we in Istanbul? Yes. Fact. Truth. Are we on a Stratcom summit? Fact. Truth. Are we right in what we're saying? Battle of narratives. It's very easy to say that you can apply the truth on everything. There is some factually identifiable truth which can't be contested. And for the rest, it's a debate. It's storytelling. And that's it. And we should not try to, although the topic of the panel is very generous, have the expectation that there will be a Ministry of Truth. Because remember 1984 and Orwell? Whenever there's a Ministry of Truth, there's a danger it may be run against you. And it may contradict at a certain moment in time the actual factual reality that we are in Istanbul, for example. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamba Ijona from Sierra Leone. I'm really happy to be here at the Stratcom Summit 2022. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for hosting the Stratcom Summit 2022 in Istanbul. Istanbul is a city that is enigmatic, with so many paradoxes, paradox between ancient and modern, paradox between a reality and imagination. I like Istanbul so much. I've been here 3 times, but I have not been able to inhale the beauty and the bliss of Istanbul. You have to come here many times to be able to get enough of Istanbul. I'm going to the question now. Thank you. My question is simple. Reading the concept note for the Stratcom Summit, I realized that there is a phrase called black propaganda. When I came across that question, that phrase, and I had it around the room today, I said to myself, is there a white propaganda? You know, we are talking about truth being louder, to speak truth louder. We in Africa have gone through several years of racism. And when we sit here, for example, the white man will call me black. But look at the coat, this black color. I'm not black, I'm brown. That's another fallacy. And that's another phobia we need to work against. But the white man calls himself white. The shirt I'm wearing is white. The white man is not like this color. But using black, like black propaganda, black market, black something, it shows that we are still thinking in the narrative of the Caucasian. And that's a propaganda we have lived with as Africans from slavery to the present. We need to wipe that out. And in Stratcom Summit 2022, those are phrases that we need to leave out. We shouldn't carry them forward. So in that pamphlet, in that concept note, we need to take off that phrase. And I don't want it to be repeated in this summit. This is my comment, and perhaps you would like to latch on it, because we are talking about truth in the post-truth era. We should be thinking along those lines, that things that are racist, we should forget about them, because we are trying to form a convergence where we talk about truth going forward. So that's my comment. Perhaps you would like to touch on it, the panelists, but it's up to you. Thank you.
Well, I mean, sir, I completely agree with you. I think when we are looking at strategic communication, the language, the choice of words, and how those words and the framing of sentences actually produces or triggers some unconscious bias. Some of this is built into things because of our colonial baggage or the baggage of racism. And as very rightly pointed out by you, sir, many times we don't think of that. But actually, these are dog whistles. And I think I completely agree with you that, you know, when we're talking about strategic communication, one very clear and important aspect is to make sure that the language that we use and the words that we choose do not trigger the kind of otherness that I was talking about.
Thank you. I can see. Is there any other question? One more over there.
Okay, this could be the last one.
Okay.
Thank you. Mikrofon alabilirsek o tarafa.
Many thanks for the Directorate of Communication in Turkey. My question is for the Ukrainian speaker. As in war times, we are facing massive black propaganda, and we as researchers and journalists in the Middle East, we are facing massive black and bad propaganda from Israel all the time. Within 80 years ago, we are facing this in research centers, in think tanks. They killed the people when they do live streaming, and they say, we will do investigation. How? How do you do this? This is facts, and this is case from many hundreds of journalists killed in Palestine by occupation army and police, Israeli police, and they say, we will do investigation, and this is facts. How facts? How can we do this as facts? In Ukraine, as Russia do, Israel do this all the time, and world stay silent and don't say anything. And Israeli have many influence all over the time in all over world media. This propaganda is dangerous for all over the world, not for Russians or for Ukrainians only. Many thanks for you.
Андрій?
Так сталося, що ми живемо в цьому не тільки останні там з 14-го року 8 років, а ми живемо з цим фактично 300 років. І весь цей час Росія намагалася визнати Україну неіснуючою державою, тобто з'явилася така ідея, яка сьогодні дійшла до апогею. Щодо методів боротьби, коли ціна перемоги – це твоє життя, народ дуже вмотивований, коли йде мова про те, що тебе можуть завтра просто знищити, і твою націю разом з тим, споживання інформації стає дуже дисциплінованим і дуже відповідальним. У нас в країні сьогодні майже 90% населення – це факт-чекери, і, як казав один з попередніх спікерів, вони критично сприймають майже все, що вони читають і бачать, бо мова йде про власне життя. Щодо чорної пропаганди, я з вами не згоден, я не розділяю пропаганду на чорну і білу. Я вважаю, що є дезінформація, але є інша інформація. Що стосується, ще одне питання було таких платформ, як TikTok, Instagram і розважальні платформи YouTube, ми знаходимо підтвердження, що там існують величезні мережі розповсюдження пропаганди. Тобто, насправді, вона чекає нас всюди. Росія готувалася до цієї війни більше десятиріччя, і вона просякла пропагандою все, починаючи від новин там офіційних, закінчуючи музикою і навіть художніми фільмами, і дитячими мультфільмами, і розважальним контентом. Тобто є два види дезінформації, пропаганди. Перша – це історія про політичне впливання, про політичне втручання, про боротьбу політичних еліт, а друга історія – це історія про Гітлера, це історія про Путіна. Тобто, коли мова йде про задумку великої війни на мирному континенті. Дякую.
Thanks for the audience and once again the distinguished speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to sort of maybe put in a comment and play off what Radu said. The fact is, the truth is that this session was interesting. It was awesome. Thank you very much, all of you. Appreciate it. Troy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to sort of continue straight into our next session. Like I said before, if you're dying for a hot beverage, politely excuse yourself and come out there. But I really sort of want to continue at this pace. With that said, I'd like to invite to the stage the editorial coordinator for the Daily Sabah, Mehmet Çelik. Just like Shuai and her guests talked about, how do you make truth louder? Mehmet and his panelists will be talking and discussing and exploring ways on how to better connect with citizens through leveraging data and maximizing its impact. Mehmet, the floor is yours. I'd also like to call to the stage Carlotta Alfonsi, Chiara Barazani, Tom Moyland, and Eugene Farrelly.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? I don't think